Welcome, YouTubers, to another episode in my Grammar Hero series. In today's video, I'm going to be working out the practice questions from the Arithmetic Reasoning Subtest of the 9th full-length practice test on my website. In case this is your first time finding my YouTube channel, I want to mention this. I recently created a small website called ASVABapp.com. There you can take 9 full-length practice tests, including this one. If for some reason you don't want to go to my website to take this practice test, you're more than welcome to work out these problems alongside me here on YouTube. In that case, I'd recommend that you pause the video after I read each question, attempt to work out the question on your own, and then resume playing the video to check your solution. As a reminder, you're not permitted to use a calculator or a reference sheet on the actual ASVAB. So regardless of where you take this practice test, try not to make use of any of those resources. Finally, I want to say this. In the description of this video, there are going to be timestamps, and those timestamps are going to be associated with each question. Next to the timestamp, more specifically, is going to be the topic that the question's testing, as well as a link to a video in which I discuss that topic in greater detail. So if for some reason you get stuck on one of these problems, just check the description, and there you'll find links to additional resources. So all that being said, let's go ahead and get started with today's video. All right, this first question says, in order to get a loan to purchase a house, Jimmy has to come up with a down payment that is 1/10 of the home's price. If the house he wants to buy is being sold for $375,000, how much will his down payment be? All right, so many of you could probably do this one in your head by finding 1/10 of 375,000. But if for some reason you couldn't do this one in your head, I'm going to work it out step by step. Again, you may have noticed that I rephrased this question like this. What is 1/10 of, and in math, of is always multiply 375,000. So in essence, we're just doing some simple multiplication here. Now, as you can see, we're multiplying a fraction by a whole number. So what you want to do is write this whole number as a fraction by placing it over 1. And this will enable you to multiply these fractions together. Again, when you multiply fractions, you just multiply straight across. So this will become 1 times 375,000 over 10 times 1. Well, thankfully enough, anything times 1 is itself. So 1 times 375,000 is just 375,000. And likewise, 1 times 10 is just 10. And at this point, all we have to do is cross out a pair of corresponding zeros in the numerator and denominator like this. And that leaves us with 37,500 over 1. Well, anything over 1 is just itself. So 37,500 over 1 is just 37,500. And therefore, we know that if Jimmy's going to put a down payment of 10% or 1/10 to purchase his home, his down payment's going to be 37,500, which is answer choice B in this case. All right, so that's that one. All right, number 2 says, during the holidays, a sterling silver necklace that regularly sells for $110 is currently on sale for 35% off. What is the sale price of the necklace? So I like to represent these problems algebraically, and that looks like this. We're trying to figure out what the sale price is. So I'm going to call that SP. Well, to find the sales price, we're going to have to take the original price, and from that, we're going to subtract the discount amount times the original price. And we have all these things. Again, we know this necklace normally sells for $110. So that's our original price. And likewise, we know our discount amount is 35%. Now, on the ASVAB, you're going to express percents usually in decimal form. So 35% in decimal form is 0.35. And again, that's our discount amount. So with those things identified, all we really have to do is plug them into this expression and then reduce it accordingly. So this becomes sales price equals original price, which is $110, minus discount amount, that was 0.35, 35% in decimal form, times original price, which was $110. All right, so first things first, we have to do 110 times 0.35. So I'm going to do that off to the side here. We have 110 times 0.35. And as you can see, I'm multiplying a whole number, notably 110, by a decimal, notably 0.35. So what you want to do is take this decimal in 0.35 and shift it 2 times to the right, such that this problem becomes 110 times 35. And once we work this out, we'll take those 2 decimals that we shifted to the right here and shift them back into the left. So we have 0 times 5 to start, that's 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 5 is 5. Before we start multiplication with this 3, we have to bring in a 0 placeholder. 3 times 0 is 0. 1 times 3 is 3. 1 times 3 is 3. Let's add these together now. 0 plus 0 is 0. 5 plus nothing is 5. 5 plus 3 is going to be 8. And 3 plus nothing is 3. Bring in 2 decimals. 1, 2. So this becomes sales price equals 110 minus 38.50. And that's kind of difficult to do in your head. So of course you could always work it off to the side. We have 110 minus 38.50. And we're subtracting a whole number by a decimal. One thing you can do right here is add a decimal here and a couple of 0 placeholders. This becomes 0 minus 0, which is 0. 0 minus 5 we can't do, so we're going to have to borrow. We're going to look to the left. Since that's a 0, we can't borrow from that, so we're going to have to borrow from this 1. This is going to become 0. This will become 10. We'll have to borrow one more time. This will become 9, and this will become 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. Drop down your decimal in place. 9 minus 8 is 1. And then this is 10 minus 3, which is 7. All right, so our sales price is going to be $71.50, which is answer choice A. If you need more help with finding discounts, tax, tips, double discounts, and original price, I do have a video for those topics on my channel. In fact, that's one of my more popular videos. Of course, there will be a link to that video in the description of this video, so check it out if you need more help with questions like these. But that's that one. All right, so number 3 here says, if a 4-foot post cast a 16-foot shadow, and at the same time a nearby tree cast a 32-foot shadow, then how tall is the tree? For problems like this one, it's always helpful to make a little sketch. Again, according to the problem, we have a post that's 4 feet tall, and it casts a shadow that is 16 feet long. Likewise, we're told that we have a tree that's nearby, and we're not told how tall the tree is. So I'm going to call the height of the tree X feet, but we're told, according to the problem, it casts a shadow that is 32 feet long. It may not be obvious at first glance, but if you enclose these shapes, what you get is a pair of similar figures. More specifically, these similar figures are right triangles. And when you have similar figures, you can quickly solve them by setting up a proportion. And in case you haven't seen a proportion in a while, they look like this. You have an equal sign and one fraction equal to another fraction. On the left-hand side of this equal sign, I'm going to put the information about this post and its shadow. And on the right-hand side of this equal sign, I'm going to put information about the tree and its shadow. So I'm going to put the height of the post here. We know this post is 4 feet tall, and its length of its shadow is 16 feet. So I'm going to fill in the right-hand side the same way. Again, in the numerator, I put the height of the post. So I'm going to put the height of the tree over here. That's X feet tall and the length of its shadow was 32 feet. All right, so now that we've identified that we're working with a pair of similar figures and set up our proportion, we can go ahead and solve this one via cross multiplication. That is, we're going to do 16 times x, which is 16x, equals 32 times 4. And now we're just solving for x, since we know x refers to the height of the tree. So a lot of people would probably work this out first by doing 32 times 4. Let me show you a little trick that's going to save you a lot of effort here. Let's divide both sides by 16. This will cross out, leaving you with just x on this side. Now let's think about this. 16 goes into 32 two times. So I can say 16 goes into 16 one time, 16 goes into 32 two times. So this problem becomes 2 times 4 over 1. And as we've seen in this video, anything over 1 is just itself. So this is 2 times 4, which is 8. 8 over 1. 8 over 1 is just 8. So the height of this tree is 8 feet, which is answer choice B. All right, so that's that one. You do have to know about similar figures for the ASVAB. And in addition, you have to be able to set up a proportion to solve them accordingly. All right, so that's that one. Nothing too difficult. All right, number 4 here says Anderson earns a monthly salary of $250 as well as a commission of $50 for every sale he makes. How many sales must he make to earn $1,500 in 1 month? All right, so for this one, we're going to have to take this word problem and convert it into an algebraic expression. And it's not as difficult to do as it may seem at first glance. First things first, let's go ahead and write down how much he earns a month. Regardless of how many sales he makes, he's always going to make $250 according to the problem. In addition to that, he makes a commission of $50 for every sale he makes. Well, every sale that he makes is currently unknown. And in math, we express unknown values with variables. In this case, I'm going to call that x. And we want to know how much he has to sell in addition to his base salary to have a monthly income of $1,500. And just like that, we set up our expression here. And let's go ahead and work on solving it. In this case, we're going to be solving for x. So at the end of the day, we're going to get x equal to something by itself. And it should be obvious that x refers to the number of sales he has to make. All right, so first things first, let's subtract 250 from both sides. All right, this crosses out here, leaving you with just 50x on this side. And you should be able to do this mentally, but if you can't, I'll go ahead and work it out. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 5 we can't do, so we're going to have to borrow. This is going to become 4. This will become 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. 4 minus 2 is 2, and 1 minus nothing is 1. So this becomes 50x equals 1250. All right, let's go ahead and divide both sides by 50 now to get x by itself. This crosses out here, leaving you with x equals 1250 over 50. Well, as we've seen in this video already, we can cross out a pair of these corresponding zeros, and this becomes 125 over 5 when we do that. And many of you could do this mentally as well, but if you can't, you can always treat this fraction as long division by reading it as 125 divided by 5. And we start by asking ourselves, how many times does 5 go into 1? It doesn't. How many times does 5 go into 12 without going over? That's going to be 2 times, given that 5 times 2 is 10. 12 minus 10 is 2, and then we drop down this 5. How many times does 5 go into 25 without going over? That's 5 times. 5 times 5 is 25 with no remainder. So x in this case is going to be 25. In other words, he has to make 25 sales to have a monthly salary of $1,500. So the answer to this one is B. All right, so you do have to get good at converting word problems into algebraic expressions. If I'm not mistaken, we're going to see at least another example of this one in today's video. All right, so that's that one. All right, so number 5 here says a nurse bought a Tesla and now has a car payment of $500 per month. $450 of her payment goes to paying off the principal, and the rest goes to paying the interest on her loan. What percent of her total monthly payment is her interest payment? All right, so we have a $500 car payment, and we're told, according to the problem, 450 of it goes toward paying off the principal, and the rest goes to paying the interest on her loan. Well, if she pays $450 out of $500, that leaves $50 left for interest. And we want to know what percent her interest payment, or $50, is of her total payment, $500. So that becomes 50 over 500. As we've seen in this video already, we can reduce this by crossing out a pair of corresponding zeros, such that this becomes 5 over 50. And now we should see that 5 and 50 have a common factor of 5, which means we can divide the numerator as well as the denominator by 5. 5 divided by 5 is 1. 50 divided by 5 is 10. You should know that 1 over 10 is the same as 10%, which means the answer to this one is A, 10%. Now, if for some reason you couldn't convert 1 over 10 to 10%, here's how you would do it. You would treat this fraction as a long division, and you would read this as 1 divided by 10. And now we say, how many times does 10 go into 1 without going over? It doesn't, so I have to add a decimal here and a 0 here. When I add that decimal, I have to bring it up right here. And again, we said 10 did not go into 1, so we can put a 0 there to indicate that 10 did not go into 1. Now that we've accounted for the decimal up here, we can disregard it down here. And this says, how many times does 10 go into 10? That's 1 time. 1 times 10 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. All right, so 1 over 10 is the same as 0.1. And to convert a decimal into a percent, you simply multiply by 100, which just means you're going to take this decimal and shift it to the right according to how many zeros there are in 100. In 100, there are 2 zeros, so we're going to take this decimal and shift it 2 times and add a 0 placeholder. As you can see, this becomes 10, and we'll just tack on our percent symbol. All right, so regardless of whether you took the short route or the long route, you should have got the answer 10%. All right, so that's that one. All right, so number 6 says, in a class on linear algebra, 1/8 of the class had an A average, 1/2 had a B average, and the rest of the class had a C average. If there were 40 students in that class, how many of them had a C average? All right, so the difficulty in this problem is the fact that we're not told what fraction of the class had a C average. So that's the first thing we have to figure out. So I'm going to use this 1 to represent the total class. And then we're going to have to subtract away the 1/8 of the class that had an A average and the 1/2 of the class that had a B average. And in doing so, we're going to figure out what fraction of the class had a C average. All right, so at this point, it's pretty obvious we're doing some subtraction involving fractions as well as a whole number. The first thing you want to do is write this whole number as a fraction by placing it over 1. So this is going to become 1 over 1 minus 1 over 8 minus 1/2. In order to add and subtract fractions, they have to have the same denominators. In this case, we have a denominator of 1, a denominator of 8, and a denominator of 2. Thankfully enough, it should be pretty easy to tell that all of these have a common denominator of 8. So in other words, we're going to rewrite all these fractions as needed to have a denominator of 8. So let's go ahead and set that up. And let me just say this. 1/8 already has a denominator of 8, so we can just go ahead and copy that one down. We don't have to make any adjustments there. To write 1 as 8, we have to multiply it by 8, and we're also going to have to do that to its numerator. So 1 times 8 is 8, 1 times 8 is 8. So 1, in other words, is the same as 8 over 8. Again, we didn't have to adjust 1/8 since it's already had a denominator of 8. To write 2 as 8, we have to multiply it by 4, and we're also going to have to do that to its numerator. 2 times 4 is 8, 1 times 4 is 4. All right, now that these fractions all have the same denominators, we can go ahead and combine them like this. This becomes 8 minus 1 minus 4, and this is the same as 8 minus 5 over 8. 8 minus 5 is 3 over 8. So 3/8 of this class had a C average. And now we have to figure out what 3/8 of 40 is. So that's going to be 3 over 8 times 40. And if it's helpful, you can write 40 as a fraction by placing it over 1. And now we can actually say this. 8 goes into 8 one time. 8 goes into 40 5 times. So this becomes 3 over 1 times 5 over 1. Again, anything over 1 is just itself. So 3 divided by 1 is 3. 5 divided by 1 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. So 15 of the 40 students had a C average. All right, so you do have to be comfortable working out word problems involving fractions for the ASVAB. On my channel, I do have 2 videos where I work out, I think, about 20 practice problems involving word problems and fractions. So please check out those videos if you need more help with fractions. All right, but that's that one. All right, number 7 says the following colors of Skittles are placed in a bowl. We have 6 purple, 6 orange, 4 green, 4 red, and 5 yellow. If you close your eyes and randomly select one from the bowl, what is the probability that you select a green one? So for the ASVAB, you do have to know basic probability. And the most basic thing about probability is this. The probability of event A occurring is the desired outcome occurring over the total possible number of outcomes. Well, in this case, we want to know the probability of picking a green Skittle. So I'm going to call that probability of G. And in our bowl, there are 4 green Skittles. That said, how many Skittles are there in the bowl in total? That's going to be 6 plus 6 plus 4 plus 4 plus 5. All right, so by working this arithmetic out here, we'll know what the probability of picking a green Skittle is. So let's go ahead and get to work doing that. Should be able to do this without having to work it off to the side. Again, we have 6 plus 4, which is 10. 6 plus 4, which is 10. So that's 20. 20 plus 5 is 25. All right, so as you can see, our answer choices are written as percents. So what we need to do next is treat this like long division and read it as 4 divided by 25. And we start by asking ourselves, how many times does 25 go into 4? It doesn't. So I'm going to put a 0 there to indicate that it doesn't. And in light of that, I have to put a decimal here and a 0 placeholder. As soon as I do that, I have to bring up the decimal and disregard the decimal from down here. So the next question is, how many times does 25 go into 40 without going over? Well, that's 1 time. 25 times 1 is 25. 40 minus 25, if you can't do that in your head, we'll go ahead and work it out. 0 minus 5 we can't do, so we're going to have to borrow. This is going to become 3. This will become 10. 10 minus 5 is 5. 3 minus 2 is 1. And again, we have as many 0 placeholders as we need to work this out. So we can drop one of those 0 placeholders down now. And the question becomes, how many times does 25 go in 150 without going over? Well, that's 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, 150. So that's going to be 6 times, given that 25 times 6 is 150. 150 minus 150 is 0. So we didn't need any of these other 0 placeholders. So 4 over 25 is the same as 0.16. And again, as we've seen in this video already, to convert a decimal to percent, we simply multiply it by 100. And when you multiply a decimal by the power of 10, all you do is take that decimal and shift it to the right according to how many zeros there are in the power of 10. Well, in 100, there are 2 zeros, so we're going to shift this 2 places to the right, so this just becomes 16, so that's 16%, which is answer choice D in this case. All right, number 8 says, how many feet of a wire fence is necessary to enclose a garden that is square and has an area of 144 square feet? So for this one, it might be helpful to make a quick diagram, and we should know that we're dealing with a square in this case. And we should, what's more, know that in squares, all the sides are equal. So this side's equal to this side, that side's equal to that side, and that side's equal to that side. In addition, should be obvious that we don't know the lengths of any of these sides of this square. And in math, we represent unknown values with letter variables. In this case, since we're referring to the side length of a square, we're going to call them S. So if this one's S, that means this one's S, and this one's S. To find how much wire fence is necessary to enclose this garden, we would add this length of fence to this length of fence to this length of fence to this length of fence. In other words, we would be finding the perimeter of this square. And to find the perimeter of any polygon, you simply add up all of its sides. So that would be S plus S plus S plus S. And we can reduce this by writing it as 4S. The challenging part about this problem is the fact that we're only given the area of this square. Again, according to the problem, this square has an area of 144 square feet. And we need to figure out the length of the sides of this square. Well, how are we going to do that? Well, to find the area of a square, you would use the formula area equals side squared. And we know what A is. So in place of A, we can go ahead and put 144. So this becomes 144 equals S squared. And by taking the square root of both sides, this will cross out, leaving us with just S on this side. Square root of 144 is 12. So S in this case is 12. So we now know the side length of our square. Again, S is 12. So all we have to do is plug in 12 for S here, and this becomes P equals 4 times 12. And you should be able to do that in your head. That's going to be 48. So in other words, it's going to take 48 feet of wire fence to enclose this square garden. Let me say this. On the ASVAB, you absolutely need to know the relationship between the area of a quadrilateral and its perimeter. Those questions do show up frequently. And they're not difficult, as you just saw, but you do have to be able to handle questions like this for the test. All right, so that's that one. Number 9 says the price of flounder in Florida is $12.75 per pound. This is 150% of the cost of flounder per pound in Alaska. How much does flounder cost per pound in Alaska? All right, so this is another instance of being required to convert a word problem into an algebraic expression. So let's go ahead and work on doing that. Again, we're told that the price of flounder in Florida is $12.75 per pound. What's more, we're told this is, in math, is always equal. So $12.75 is or is equal to 150%. Again, as I said at the beginning of this video, you're always going to express percents in decimal form. Well, 150% in decimal form is 1.5. So this is 1275 equals 1.5 of the cost of in math is always multiply. So 1.5 times the cost of flounder per pound in Alaska. Well, that's unknown. That's actually what we're trying to figure out. So I'm going to let the cost of flounder per pound in Alaska be represented with the letter variable y. All right, so this becomes 1275 equals 1.5 times y, or just 1.5y. By solving for y in this case, we'll know how much flounder costs per pound in Alaska. So in order to do that, all we have to do is divide both sides by 1.5. This crosses out here. And as you can see, y is 12.75 divided by 1.5. Well, again, as I've said in this video already, we can treat fractions as long division by reading them like this. We have 1275 divided by 1.5. And now we're doing long division involving two decimals. The key to doing long division with decimals is this. If the decimal's inside the division bracket, you don't have to make any adjustments whatsoever. You can just go ahead and do the long division. If, however, the decimal's outside the division bracket, you have to shift that decimal to the right however many times you need to, such that that number outside the division bracket becomes a whole number. So in this case, we're going to have to shift the decimal 1.5 one time to the right to make 1.5 15. And to keep proportionality, we're going to have to shift the decimal inside the division bracket a corresponding number of times. So the decimal is going to move there. So this becomes 127.5 divided by 15. And if it's helpful, you can go ahead and move up your decimal right now. All right, so let's go ahead and get started with this one. We start by asking ourselves, how many times does 15 go into 1? It doesn't. How many times does 15 go into 12 without going over? It doesn't. How many times does 15 go into 127 without going over? All right, at first glance, that seems challenging, but that said, we can actually use our answer choices to estimate this very quickly. It's either going to be 6, 7, 8, or 9. And I'm going to start with 8. What's 15 times 8? 5 times 8 is 40, carry a 4. 8 times 1 is 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. All right, so clearly the maximum number of times 15 can go into 127 without going over is going to be 8. 15 times 8 is 120. 127 minus 120 is 7. And now we just drop down this 5. And now the question is, how many times does 15 go into 75 without going over? You can actually use your hands to count this out. 15, 30, 45, 60, 75. That's 5 times. So 15 times 5 is 75. 75 minus 75 is 0. So y in this case is 8.5. Again, in math, it's customary to write the variable for which you solved on the left. So that's y equals 8.5. In other words, if flounder costs $12.75 per pound in Florida, then it costs $8.50 per pound in Alaska, which is answer choice C. All right, so that's that one. Number 10 says a premium printing press can print 6,000 copies in 20 minutes. A second press can print 15,000 copies in 60 minutes. How many more copies per minute will the faster press print than the slower press? All right, so first things first, we have to convert the rates of these printing presses to be in terms of minutes. So for this first one, we're going to take 6,000 and divide it by 20. And that will get that one in terms of how many copies it prints per minute. And then for this next one, we're going to have to do 15,000 and divide it by 60 to make it be in terms of minutes. All right, thankfully enough, this is actually pretty easy to do. As we've seen in this video already, we can actually cross out a corresponding pair of zeros. So this becomes 600 over 2. 600 divided by 2, we should be able to do in our head. That's 300. So this premium printing press can print 300 copies per minute. All right, let's figure out how fast this other printing press goes. Again, we can cross out a pair of corresponding zeros. So this becomes 1500 over 6. And this one's not as easy to do mentally. That said, we can always treat this as long division by reading this as 1500 divided by 6. And this math, it turns out, is very, very easy to do. We start by asking ourselves, how many times does 6 go into 1? It doesn't. How many times does 6 go into 15 without going over? It's going to be 2 times. 6 times 2 is 12, of course. 15 minus 12 is 3. Drop down one of these zeros. So in this case, we can actually drop down both of these zeros because that will get us our answer. How many times does 6 go into 30? That would be 5. Again, 6 times 5 is 30. 6 times 50, however, will be 300. And 300 minus 300 is 0. So this printing press prints at a rate of 250 copies per minute. Again, how much faster is the premium printing press than the slower one? That's simply going to be 300 minus 250, or just 50 more copies per minute, which is answer choice B in this case. All right, so that's that one. Just some simple math there. Number 11 says, after their mother passed away, Ela and Ethan inherited $1 million. If Ethan received $125,000 and Ela received the rest of the money, what fraction of their mother's estate did Ela receive? All right, so there's a few approaches to this problem. I'm going to approach it this way. First, I'm going to subtract out the amount that Ethan received from the $1 million inheritance. So that's going to be 1 million minus the $125,000 that Ethan received. And by doing this subtraction, we'll figure out how much money Ela received. So let's go ahead and do this. We have 0 minus 0, which is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 0 is 0. 0 minus 5 we can't do. So we're going to have to borrow. Normally we borrow from the left, but in this case we have a 0 to the left. So we're going to look to the left one more time. That's also a 0. So we're going to come all the way over here and borrow from this 1. This is going to become 0. This will become 10. We're going to have to borrow again. This will become 9, and this will become 10. And then finally, this will become 9, and this will become 10. All right, so now we can actually do this subtraction. 10 minus 5 is 5. 9 minus 2 is 7. 9 minus 1 is 8. And nothing minus nothing is nothing. So in this case, Ela received $875,000. To figure out what fraction of the estate this is, we're going to do 875,000 over 1 million. And a million has 6 zeros. Okay, so let's go ahead and cross out some corresponding zeros here. We're going to cross out this pair of zeros, this pair of zeros, and this pair of zeros. So this becomes 875 over 1,000. And in this case, there's a few approaches you can take. You could either know that this is going to be 87.5% and match that to one of these fractions, or we could just keep reducing this, and it should be obvious that 875 and 1,000 both have a common factor of 25, so we can reduce it that way. 1,000 divided by 25. Well, let's think about this. What is 100 divided by 25? That would be 4, and 1,010 is 10 times bigger than 100, so this would be 40. All right. And this one may not be that easy to do, so you could do 875 divided by 25 like this. How many times does 25 go into 8? It doesn't. How many times does 25 go into 87 without going over? That's going to be 3 times, given that 3 times 25 is 75. 7 minus 5 is 2. 8 minus 7 is 1, and then we drop down this 5, of course. How many times does 25 go into 125? Well, you can use your hands if you need to. 25, 50, 75, 100, 125. So that's going to be 5. 5 times 25 is 125, so there is no remainder there. So this becomes 35 over 40. And we should realize that 35 and 40 have a common factor of 5. 35 divided by 5 is 7. 40 divided by 5 is 8. So this reduces to 7/8. In other words, Gila receives 7/8 of the estate. All right, so occasionally the ASVAB does put big numbers in questions to test your ability to cross out corresponding zeros and actually work with big numbers. So don't be alarmed if you see some big numbers like 1,000,000 and 125,000 on the ASVAB. Again, it's a test of your ability to do arithmetic, which means got to be comfortable crossing out corresponding zeros and simplifying big fractions accordingly. And this question was a good example of that. All right, so that's that one. Number 12 says Cindy's scores on her first 4 organic chemistry tests were 65, 75, 80, and 72. In order to get a C+ in the class, she needs to have an average of at least 77%. What score must she make on her 5th test to get a C+ in the class? All right, so this is a problem about averages. And in case you forgot, to find an average, you simply sum up the numbers or data points you're given, and you divide that by the total number of data points or numbers. In this case, we're told what our average has to be. Cindy has to have an average of 77% to get a C+ in this class. So let's go ahead and replace average with 77 over here. What is the sum of her scores on her exams? It's 65 plus 75 plus 80 plus 72. And we also have to include the unknown score that she gets on her 5th exam. So that's going to be plus X. And we're going to divide that by the total number of exams she takes. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 exams. All right, so by doing this arithmetic, more specifically by solving for X, we'll know what score she needs to get on her 5th exam to have a 77 average in the class. So to start, I'm going to multiply both sides by 5. This will clear it from the denominator over here and leave you with 65 plus 75 plus 80 plus 72 plus X. And let's go ahead and work this off to the side. We have 77 times 5. 7 times 5 is 35, carry a 3. 7 times 5 is 35, 36, 37, 38. So this becomes 385 equals all this plus X. Again, we're trying to solve for X, so ultimately we have to move all these things over to the other side. And prior to doing that, I'm actually just going to combine them to make that math a little bit easier. So we have, and I'm going to do that off to the side here. We have 65, 75, 80, and 72. So let's add those together. 5 plus 5 is 10, plus 2 is 12. So this is going to be 2 and carry a 1. 6 plus 1 is 7. We have 7 plus 7 plus 7, which is 21, plus 8 is going to be 29. So this becomes 292 here. And let me just go ahead and write this like this. 385 equals 292 plus X. Again, to solve for X, we're just going to subtract 292 from both sides. This will cross out, leaving you with just X on this side. And let's go ahead and do the subtraction. 5 minus 2 is going to be 3. 8 minus 9 we can't do, so we have to borrow. This becomes 2, and this becomes 18. 18 minus 9 is 9. 2 minus 2 is nothing. So we can see X in this case is 93. In other words, Cindy has to get a 93 on her fifth exam in order to have a 77 average or a C plus average in the class. All right, so that's that one. Questions involving averages are very common on the ASVAB, so make sure you can work with averages. They may not be exactly like this one, but that said, generally the setup is the same. All right, so that's this one. Number 13 says, if it costs $10.50 per square foot to tile a floor, how much would it cost to tile a rectangular section of the floor that is 9 by 20 feet? All right, so a few things should jump out at you right away. Specifically this, per square foot. Whenever you're dealing with square feet, that means you're dealing with area. If this said cubic feet, you would be dealing with volume. So in this case, we have to start this problem by finding the area of the section of the floor that we want to tile. And thankfully enough, the problem told us the area of the floor that we want to tile is a rectangle. That's 9 by 20. To find the area of a rectangle, it's always length times width. And in this case, that's going to be 20 times 9. And in case you can't do that in your head, you can always work it off to the side. 20 times 9. 9 times 0 is 0. 2 times 9 is 18. So the area of the section of the floor that we want to tile is 180 square feet. So now that we know its area, all we have to do is take that and multiply it by the cost per square feet, which is $10.50. All right. So as you can see, we're multiplying a whole number, notably 180, by a decimal, notably $10.50. In order to proceed, we want to clear this decimal from $10.50, and we can do that by shifting it 2 times to the right, and this becomes $10.50 times 180, albeit with 2 decimals to shift back into the left at the end. Again, we shifted those decimals to the right here. We'll shift them to the left over here. All right, let's go ahead and work on this. 0 times 0 is 0. 0 times 5 is 0. 0 times 0 is 0. 1 times 0 is 0. Before we start multiplication with this 8, we have to bring in 1 0 placeholder. 8 times 0 is 0. 8 times 5 is 40, so bring down a 0 and carry a 4. 8 times 0 is 0, plus 4 is 4, and 8 times 1 is 8. Before we start multiplication with this 1, we now have to bring in 2 0 placeholders. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 5 is 5. 1 times 0 is 0. And 1 times 1 is 1. So let's add these together. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 0 plus 0 plus 0 is 0. 4 plus 5 is 9. 8 plus nothing is 8. And 1 plus nothing is 1. Let's go ahead and bring in our 2 decimals, 1, 2. And there we have it. Our cost to tile this rectangular section of the floor is going to be $18.90. And we should see that that is answer choice B in this case. All right, so that's that one. Nothing too difficult there. All right, so number 14 says, in 1 year, the population of a city increased by 20%. The next year, however, it decreased by 10%. What was the overall percent increase in the population over the 2 years? All right, so at first glance, these problems can be pretty challenging. That said, there is one thing that you can do to make this problem very easy. In fact, if you do this one thing, you might be able to get to the point where you can solve these in your head. And that one thing is to assign a value to the size of the initial population. And this problem doesn't tell you what that value is. So in other words, you get to pick whatever value you want. The trick is to pick a value that's very easy to work with. And in light of that, I'm going to pick the value 100. All right, so I'm going to say my initial population was 100. According to the problem, the population grew by 20% the first year. So what I'm going to do next is go ahead and figure out what 20% of 100 is, and that's going to give me the new size of my population. Well, that's actually pretty easy to do. What is 20% of 100? Well, that's 20. So our population grew by 20. So 100 plus 20 is 120. All right. And if you couldn't do that in your head, you could always do this. 100 times zero point 0.2. Again, we always express percents in decimal form. The decimal form of 20% is 0.2. And if you need to, you can actually move this decimal over one place and do 100 times 2, albeit with one decimal to move back into the left. 0 times 2 is 0. 0 times 2 is 0. 1 times 2 is 2. Bring our one decimal back over. So that's how I got that plus 20 people. All right, so our new population is 120. And then we're told that the second year, our population decreased by 10%. So we're going to have to figure out what 10% of 120 is, and we're going to subtract that number away to get our final population. So that's going to be this, 120, and you should be able to do that in your head. Again, 10% of 120 is 12. 120 minus 12 is 108. But that said, let me go ahead and work it out. Again, we're going from a population of 120, and we're decreasing by 10%. So that's going to be 120 times 0.1. Again, we're going to shift our decimal one place to the right. This becomes 120 times 1, albeit with one decimal to move back into the left at the end when we're done. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 2 is 2. 1 times 1 is 1. Bring our decimal back in one place. So again, this is minus 12 people. So again, we started with a population of 100. We increased 20% or 20 people to get a new population of 120. After that, our population decreased by 10%, which is 12 people, to get a final population of 108. And the question is, what is the overall percent increase in the population of 2 years? So here we can actually use the percent change formula. Again, percent change says take your new value minus the old value and divide it by the old value. Well, our new value is right here. It's this 108. And what was our initial value? It was 100. So this becomes percent change equals 108 minus 100 over 100. And this math's actually pretty easy to do. 108 minus 100 is 8. So this becomes 8 over 100. 8 over 100 is 0.08, and we should know that 0.08 is 8%. So the overall percent increase in our population was 8%. It went ultimately from 100 to 108 people. All right, so that's that one. Kind of a difficult problem, but that said, eventually, if you work out enough of these problems, you should be able to do this one without having to do any work whatsoever. All right, so that's that one. Number 15 says a gas truck can fill a gas tank at the rate of 500 cubic inches per minute. If a gas tank is 20 inches long, 20 inches wide, and 15 inches tall, how long will it take the gas truck to fill the gas tank? All right, so previously in this video, I mentioned that if you're dealing with squares, like square inches or square feet, that meant you were working with area. In this case, we have 500 cubic inches. We're dealing with cubes. And that should be a clue that you're going to be finding volume. So more specifically, we're going to be finding the volume of this gas tank. And we're told it's 20 inches long, 20 inches wide, and 15 inches tall. In other words, it's a rectangular prism. And how do you find the volume of a rectangular prism? That's volume equals length times width times height. And we have all those values. We have 20 for length, 20 for width, and a height of 15. So let's go ahead and multiply these things together. 20 times 20, you should know, is 400. Again, you have to use mental math to work through this test quickly and accurately. And then we have 400 times 15. So as not to make any mistakes, I'm actually going to work that off to the side. So we got 400 times 15. All right, 0 times 5 is 0. 0 times 5 is 0. 4 times 5 is going to be 20. Before we start multiplication with this 1, we have to bring in a 0 placeholder. 1 times 0 is 0. 1 times 0 is 0. 4 times 1 is 4. Let's add these together. This is 2,000 plus 4,000, which is 6,000. So the volume of our gas tank is going to be 6,000 cubic inches. All right, so we know our gas truck can fill a gas tank at a rate of 500 cubic inches. So to figure out how long it will take to fill up this gas tank, we're going to do 6,000 cubic inches, which is the volume of our gas tank, and divide it by 500 cubic inches, which is the rate at which this gas truck can fill up gas tanks. All right, and this is actually pretty easy to do. Our units cross out, so that goes away. We can cross out these corresponding zeros and these corresponding zeros, and we're left with 60 over 5. We should know that 60 over 5 is 12. So in other words, it will take this gas truck 12 minutes to fill up this gas tank. And again, if you couldn't do this math here, you could actually treat this as long division and have read this as 60 divided by 5. And you would say, how many times does 5 go into 6 without going over? That's 1 time. 1 times 5 is 5. 6 minus 5 is 1. Drop down this 0. 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. Okay, so again, the answer to this one is 12 minutes. All right, so number 16 here says a train goes 3 times as fast downhill as it can go uphill, and 2/3 as fast uphill as it can go on level ground. If it goes 100 miles per hour downhill, how long will it take to travel 60 miles on level ground? All right, you should recognize that this problem, more or less, has all the elements of the distance formula. Again, the distance formula describes the relationship between distance, rate, and time. It says distance can be found by multiplying rate and time together. The way this relationship works is like this. If you're given at least 2 of these variables, you can always find the third one. So if you're given rate and time, you can find distance. If you're given distance and rate, you can find time. And if you're given distance and time, you can find rate. Well, let's see what we have in this problem. If it goes 100 miles per hour downhill, again, miles per hour is a rate. How long will it take? How long is in reference to time, or t, to travel 60 miles on level ground. That's a distance. So let's start plugging things in. We know d in this case is going to be 60. Now, here's the rub in this problem. We're given a rate in terms of downhill speed, but we're given a distance in terms of flat terrain. So we can't necessarily use this rate right now. We're actually going to have to convert this rate to be in terms of the train going across level ground. So what I'm going to do right here is I'm going to put a R there, and I'm going to put a little asterisk next to it to remind myself that I have to make a conversion for that rate. And then t, of course, is what we're solving for. How long will it take? All right, so let's deal with this rate now, since that's the only thing holding us up. In the problem, we're given information about the speed of the train as it goes across 3 different types of terrain. We have level ground, uphill, and downhill. All right, and none of those are known. So in math, it's customary to represent unknown values with letter variables. So I'm going to say the train goes X miles per hour across level ground. Well, according to the problem, it goes 2/3 as fast uphill as it can go across level ground. So that would be 2/3 x for uphill. And as far as downhill goes, the problem says the train goes 3 times as fast downhill as it can go uphill. So that's going to be 3 times 2/3 times x. And this is actually very easy to simplify. Again, we could just cross out these 3's, and this leaves us with just 2x here. So in other words, the rate of the train as it goes across level ground is x miles per hour. Uphill is 2/3 of x miles per hour, and downhill is 2x miles per hour. Well, according to the problem, we know the train goes 100 miles per hour downhill, and we know that's going to be equal to 2x. By solving this for x, we'll figure out the rate of the train as it goes across level ground. So just divide both sides by 2 here. This crosses out, leaving you with x on this side. 100 divided by 2 is 50. So in other words, the rate of this train as it goes across level ground is 50 miles per hour. So now we can actually substitute 50 in place of r. So this becomes 60 equals 50t. Again, we're solving for t, so let's divide both sides by 50 now. This crosses out, leaving you with just t on this side. And we can see t is equal to 60 over 50. Well, we can actually cross out a pair of these corresponding zeros, and this leaves us with 6 over 5. All right, so I'm actually going to treat this fraction as long division by reading this as 6 divided by 5. And I start by asking myself, how many times does 5 go into 6 without going over? That's 1 time. 1 times 5 is 5. 6 minus 5 is 1. So at this point, we actually have to add a decimal here and a 0 placeholder so we can keep doing this long division. When we add that decimal, we want to bring it up right in place, and then we want to drop down our 0. Now the question is, how many times does 5 go into 10 without going over? That's going to be 2 times, given that 5 times 2 is 10. 10 minus 10 is 0. So t in this case is 1.2 hours. And if we look at our answer choices, we can see that they're expressed in hours and minutes. So we're going to have to convert 1.2 hours to be in terms of hours and minutes. And more specifically, we have to figure out what 0.2 of an hour is. And that's actually pretty easy to do. How many minutes are there in an hour? There are 60 minutes in an hour. So to figure out what 0.2 of an hour is, we're going to take 60 and multiply it by 0.2. Again, we're multiplying a whole number by a decimal. So we want to shift that decimal 1 time to the right. This becomes 60 times 2, albeit with 1 decimal to move back into the left. When we're done, 0 times 2 is 0. 6 times 2 is 12. Move our 1 decimal back in. So t in this case is going to be 1 hour and 12 minutes. And we should see that that is answer choice A in this case. All right, so that's it for this video. As always, I hope you found it helpful. And as usual, you're more than welcome to leave feedback in the comment section below. Before I cut you loose, I want to stress this again. There are 9 full-length practice tests on my website. If you take all 9 of them and watch the videos for the questions that you missed, you should do great on test day. In addition to taking those 9 practice tests, I also strongly encourage you to download a copy of my reference sheets and memorize those formulas. Apart from that, I'll say if you want to support my channel, please consider subscribing to it. But on that note, I'm going to go ahead and cut you loose. Konnichiwa.